The dust was thick as blood when Violet Parker's wagon wheel struck the jagged rock, sending her world careening into chaos. It happened in an instant. The horses reared, the wagon tipped, and then the crushing weight of her family's belongings and livelihood pinned her to the unforgiving earth of the Nevada desert, just 3 miles outside of Rhyolite. The late summer of 1876 had been punishing, even by frontier standards. Violet had made this journey alone, determined to reach the burgeoning mining town where her uncle had promised her work in his dry goods store. At 22, she'd had enough of St. Louis society and its stifling expectations for a young woman whose father had left nothing but debts when he died. "Help!" She called out, her voice barely carrying over the frightened whinnies of her horses, which had broken free from their harness but remained nearby, tethered by loyalty or perhaps simple confusion. "Is anyone there?" The sun beat down mercilessly, and Violet could feel the weight of the overturned wagon pressing harder with each labored breath she took. Hours seemed to pass, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. A shadow fell across her face, and Violet squinted up to see the silhouette of a man against the blazing sun. "Madam, hold on there." The voice was deep, with a hint of a southern drawl. The man dismounted in a swift, fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. "Under." "Here," Violet managed, her lungs constricted by the weight. The man dropped to his knees, his face coming into view. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin, and concern etched deep lines around them. "Name's Xavier Galloway," he said quickly, assessing the situation. "I'm going to get you out of there." Xavier circled the wagon, examining how it had fallen. The situation looked grim. The heavy oak frame had collapsed, trapping Violet beneath what had to be several hundred pounds of wood, metal, and supplies. "Can you move at all, madam?" he asked, crouching down to where he could see her face. "Just my arms," Violet replied, her voice strained. "My legs are pinned." Xavier nodded grimly. "I'll have to lift it. When I do, you need to pull yourself out as quick as you can. You understand?" Violet nodded, watching as Xavier removed his leather vest and hat, revealing a shock of dark hair. He positioned himself at the heaviest part of the wagon, bracing his shoulders beneath the frame. "On the count of 3, he called to her. 1, 2, 3. With a guttural sound that was part growl, part prayer, Xavier heaved upward. The muscles in his arms and back strained visibly through his cotton shirt as the wagon budged, then rose several inches. It was impossible, a feat of strength that defied reason, but somehow he was lifting it. "Now," he shouted through gritted teeth. Violet didn't hesitate. Using her arms, she pulled herself forward, ignoring the burning pain in her legs as sensation rushed back into them. She dragged herself clear of the wagon just as Xavier's strength began to falter. With a thunderous crash, the wagon settled back into the dust, and Xavier staggered backward, breathing heavily. "Thank you," Violet gasped, still lying in the dirt, afraid to test her legs. "I don't know how you did that." Xavier shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "A man finds strength when it's needed." He knelt beside her. "Let's see about those legs." His hands were gentle as he checked for broken bones, though Violet winced at his touch. "Nothing broken, I think," he said finally, "but you're going to be mighty sore for a few days." "I'm heading to Rhyolite," Violet said, attempting to sit up. "My uncle Thomas Parker has a store there." Recognition flashed in Xavier's eyes. "Tom's your uncle. I know him well. Good man." He helped her to a sitting position. "Looks like your wagon's done for, but we can salvage your things." "My ranch is closer than town, just over that ridge. Let's get you there to rest, and I'll send word to Tom." Violet hesitated, acutely aware of the impropriety of going alone to a stranger's home, even one who had just saved her life. Xavier seemed to read her thoughts. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, will see to your needs," he added with a small smile. "I promise you'll be safe, Miss Parker." After gathering what belongings they could onto Xavier's horse, he helped Violet into the saddle before mounting behind her. The closeness was intimate in a way Violet had never experienced, but her aching body was grateful for the support of his chest against her back as they rode toward the Galloway ranch. Xavier's home turned out to be a substantial affair, a main house built of sturdy logs with a wide porch, flanked by a barn and several outbuildings. A windmill creaked nearby, pumping water into a large tank. "This is all yours," Violet couldn't help asking as they approached. "Started with 20 acres 5 years ago," Xavier replied. "Now it's closer to 500. Cattle mostly, but I've got some good quarter horses too, Mrs. Abernathy." A plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes emerged from the house as they arrived, immediately taking charge of the situation with maternal efficiency. "Land sakes, Mr. Galloway, what have you brought home now?" she exclaimed, helping Violet dismount. "Miss Parker had an accident with her wagon," Xavier explained. "She's Tom Parker's niece, headed to Rhyolite. I'll ride to town later and let him know she's here." Under Mrs. Abernathy's care, Violet was soon bathed, dressed in a borrowed nightgown, and tucked into a clean bed in a small but comfortable guest room. The housekeeper applied arnica salve to her bruises and brought her a tray with hot soup and fresh bread. "Mr. Galloway said you were trapped under a wagon," Mrs. Abernathy asked as she fluffed the pillows. "And he lifted it off you," Violet nodded. "I still can't believe it. It should have been impossible." Mrs. Abernathy's face softened. "That boy's always been stronger than he looks. His pa was the same way. But more than that, he's got a good heart. Rest now, dear. You're safe here." As the older woman left, Violet sank deeper into the pillows, her body aching but her mind racing. Xavier Galloway had appeared like something out of a dime novel, the mysterious cowboy who performs feats of heroism. Yet there was something unassuming about him, a quietness that contradicted his physical presence. She was drifting to sleep when she heard hoofbeats outside, signaling Xavier's departure for town. In the hazy space between wakefulness and dreams, Violet found herself hoping he would return soon. The next morning, Violet awoke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, until the events of the previous day came rushing back. Testing her limbs, she found she could move without too much pain, though dark bruises mottled her legs. She had just managed to dress herself in a simple calico day dress that Mrs. Abernathy had laid out for her when she heard voices downstairs, one of them her uncle's familiar baritone. "There she is!" Thomas Parker exclaimed as Violet carefully descended the stairs. He rushed forward to embrace her gently. "When Galloway rode in last night with news of your accident, I was beside myself with worry." "I'm fine, Uncle Thomas," Violet assured him, returning his embrace. "Thanks to Mr. Galloway." Her uncle turned to Xavier, who stood by the fireplace, looking somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. "I can't thank you enough, son. First you save my niece, then you ride all the way to town to fetch me. The Parkers are in your debt." Xavier shook his head. "Any man would have done the same." "Not any man could have lifted that wagon," Thomas countered. Violet wrote that she was bringing nearly all her possessions. That must have been 800 pounds at least. Violet saw a flush creep up Xavier's neck. "The angle was favorable," he said dismissively, "and fear gives a man strength." Thomas didn't look convinced, but he let the matter drop. "Well, I've sent for a new wagon. It should arrive from Carson City in about a week. In the meantime, Violet, you're welcome to stay with me in town." Before Violet could respond, Mrs. Abernathy bustled in from the kitchen. "Nonsense. The girl needs rest, not to be bouncing in a buggy to town and then sleeping on your lumpy sofa, Tom Parker." She turned to Violet with a smile. "You're welcome to stay here until you're fully recovered, dear. We've plenty of room." Uncle Thomas looked uncertain. "I don't know, Martha. It's not exactly proper." "I'll be here as chaperone," Mrs. Abernathy said firmly, "and you can visit every day if you like. Besides, Mr. Galloway is hardly ever in the house, always out with those cattle of his." Xavier, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "Miss Parker is welcome to stay as long as she needs." His blue eyes met Violet's. "If that's agreeable to her." Something in his gaze made Violet's heart quicken. "It's very kind of you," she said. "I would be grateful for a few days to recover before facing town life." And so it was decided. Uncle Thomas would return to Rhyolite, and Violet would remain at the Galloway ranch until she was fully healed and her new wagon arrived. The next few days established a comfortable routine. Violet found herself regaining strength quickly, and by the third day she was able to move about the house freely, even helping Mrs. Abernathy with light chores. Xavier was, as predicted, often absent during daylight hours, tending to his ranch responsibilities. But in the evenings, they would gather in the parlor. Xavier would read aloud from one of the many books that lined his shelves, Dickens, Twain, even some poetry, while Mrs. Abernathy knitted and Violet mended clothes or simply listened, surprised by the cowboy's eloquence. "You read beautifully," she remarked one evening after he finished a chapter of David Copperfield. "I wouldn't have expected a rancher to have such a library." Xavier closed the book, running his fingers over the leather binding. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She brought her love of books west with her." His expression grew distant. "After they both passed influenza 6 years ago, the books became even more precious." "I'm sorry," Violet said softly. "I lost my father last year. That's partly why I decided to come west, to escape the memories." Violet considered this. "No, not to escape them. To make new ones, I suppose. To find out who I might become without the constraints of my old life." Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The West is good for that. It has a way of stripping a person down to their essentials." Their conversations grew deeper as the days passed. Violet learned that Xavier had been born in Virginia, but his family had moved west when he was 10. He'd worked ranches all over the territory before saving enough to buy his own land. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, breeding finer horses, maybe building a bigger house someday. In turn, Violet told him about her life in St. Louis, her father's failed business ventures, and her own thwarted ambitions to become an artist. "You paint?" Xavier asked, genuine interest lighting his features. "I used to. I brought my supplies with me, actually. They were in the wagon," Violet sighed. "I hope they survived the accident." The next morning, Violet found a package wrapped in brown paper on the breakfast table. Inside were her paints, brushes, and a small wooden case of canvas boards, all salvaged from the wreckage of her wagon. "Mr. Galloway rode out at dawn to collect them," Mrs. Abernathy explained, smiling at Violet's delighted expression. "Said he didn't want to mention it in case they were ruined, but it looks like they fared better than the wagon." That afternoon, when Xavier returned from checking fence lines, Violet was set up on the porch, painting the vista of mountains and desert that stretched beyond his property. "You have a gift," he said quietly, watching over her shoulder as the landscape took shape on her canvas. "Thank you for retrieving my supplies," Violet replied, not looking up from her work. It was thoughtful of you. This land deserves to be captured by someone who sees its beauty, Xavier said, and Violet heard something in his voice that made her turn to look at him. He was staring not at the painting, but at her, with an intensity that sent heat rushing to her cheeks. For a moment, neither spoke, caught in a current of unspoken feeling. Mrs. Abernathy's call to dinner broke the spell, and Xavier excused himself to wash up. But something had shifted between them, a recognition of mutual admiration that went beyond gratitude or hospitality. That night, unable to sleep, Violet slipped downstairs for a glass of water. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. As she passed the study, she noticed a light burning and paused. Xavier sat at his desk, poring over what looked like account books. His brow was furrowed in concentration, one hand rubbing absently at his neck. Without his usual hat and riding clothes, dressed only in a simple shirt and trousers, he looked younger, more vulnerable somehow. Violet must have made a sound, for he looked up suddenly, surprise giving way to a warm smile when he saw her. "Can't sleep?" he asked, setting down his pencil. "I was just getting some water," Violet explained, suddenly conscious of her state of undress. She wore only her nightgown and a hastily donned robe. "I didn't mean to disturb your work." "You're a welcome distraction," Xavier assured her, gesturing to the papers spread before him. "Ranch accounts." "Not my favorite task." Violet stepped into the room, curiosity overcoming propriety. "Is something wrong? You look troubled." Xavier hesitated, then sighed. "The ranch is doing well enough, but I've been trying to expand. There's a parcel of land to the north with water rights that would make all the difference." He ran a hand through his hair. "The bank in Rhyolite turned down my loan application yesterday." "Why? Your ranch seems prosperous." "It is, but not prosperous enough according to them. Or perhaps it's because I don't have the right connections." A flash of bitterness crossed his face. "The banker's son-in-law wants the same land." Violet moved closer, glancing at the figures in his ledger. Having helped her father with his business for years, she was familiar with financial records. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the book. Xavier pushed it toward her, and Violet studied the neat columns of numbers. "You're doing better than you think," she said after a few minutes. "Your cattle operation is profitable, but your horse breeding program is where the real potential lies. If you were to shift some resources there." She outlined a plan, reallocating his assets to maximize returns. Xavier listened intently, occasionally asking a sharp question or making a suggestion of his own. Before long, they had drafted a new business proposal that showcased the ranch's growth potential far more effectively than his original figures. "Violet, this is remarkable," Xavier said finally, genuine admiration in his voice. "Where did you learn to do this?" "My father's business failures taught me more than his successes ever could," she replied with a sad smile. "I learned what not to do, mostly. But I also discovered I have a head for figures. Would you?" Xavier hesitated, then continued, "Would you consider presenting this to the bank with me? They might be more inclined to listen with a fresh perspective." The request surprised her. "You'd trust me with this?" "I trusted you with my financial records just now," Xavier pointed out. "And you've just demonstrated that you understand ranch economics better than I do, despite having been here less than a week." Warmth bloomed in Violet's chest at his confidence in her. "I'd be honored to help." They worked late into the night, refining their proposal. When Violet finally returned to her room, it was with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since before her father's death. More than that, there was a growing connection with Xavier, a partnership based on mutual respect that felt different from any relationship she'd known before. The next day, dressed in her best remaining outfit, thankfully saved from the wagon wreckage. Violet accompanied Xavier to the Rhyolite Bank. They stopped first at her uncle's store, where Thomas was surprised but pleased to see her looking so well. "You've recovered quickly," he remarked, embracing her. "Though I expected you'd be moving into town by now." "Actually, Uncle Thomas, I'm helping Mr. Galloway with a business matter today," Violet explained. "He's applying for a loan to expand his ranch." Thomas's eyebrows rose. "Is he now?" "Well, Franklin Ward's a hard man to persuade, but if anyone can charm him, it's you, my dear." As they left the store, Xavier glanced at Violet. "Your uncle seems to think highly of your persuasive abilities." Violet smiled. "He overestimates me. But I am determined, and I believe in your ranch's potential." The Rhyolite Bank was an imposing structure of red brick, one of the few permanent buildings in the rapidly growing town. Inside, they were shown to Franklin Ward's office, where the banker, a corpulent man with mutton chop whiskers, greeted them with obvious surprise. "Galloway, I believe we concluded our business yesterday," he said coldly. "And who might this be?" "This is Miss Violet Parker, Thomas Parker's niece," Xavier introduced her. "She's helped me revise my proposal, and we'd like you to reconsider my application." Ward's eyes narrowed, but basic courtesy compelled him to gesture to the chairs before his desk. "Very well. You have 5 minutes." Violet took the lead, presenting their revised figures with the confidence of someone twice her age. She emphasized the potential of Xavier's horse breeding program, pointing out that his bloodlines were already becoming known throughout the territory. With the water rights from the northern parcel, Mr. Galloway could increase his herd by 30% within 2 years, she concluded. The return on investment is clearly demonstrated in these projections. Ward studied the papers, his expression unreadable. "These are impressive figures, Miss Parker, but business in the West requires more than good bookkeeping. It requires stability, connections. Mr. Galloway has been operating his ranch successfully for 5 years, Violet countered. That demonstrates stability in a region where most ventures fail within 2. And as for connections, Xavier added, I believe my standing in this community speaks for itself. Ask any rancher from here to Carson City about Galloway stock." Ward leaned back in his chair, a calculating look in his eyes. "There's still the matter of collateral. The ranch itself is already leveraged for your existing loans." Violet felt her heart sink, but before she could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. "I'll vouch for him." They turned to see Thomas Parker standing in the doorway. "Tom," Ward acknowledged with a nod, "this is an unexpected intrusion." "Not at all. I'm merely offering my support for a sound business proposition." Thomas stepped into the room. "I'm willing to act as guarantor for Xavier Galloway's loan. My store and property can serve as additional collateral." Violet stared at her uncle in shock. Xavier seemed equally stunned. "Mr. Parker, that's not necessary," he began, but Thomas held up a hand. "You saved my niece's life, Galloway. But more than that, I've watched you build your ranch from nothing. You're good for this town, and what's good for Rhyolite is good for my business." Ward cleared his throat, clearly reconsidering the situation. With Thomas Parker's backing, one of the town's most established businessmen, the dynamics had changed. "I'll need to review these figures more thoroughly," he said finally. "But I believe we may be able to come to an arrangement after all." As they left the bank an hour later, loan provisionally approved pending final paperwork, Violet could hardly contain her excitement. "We did it," she exclaimed as soon as they were on the street. Xavier grinned, a rare full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "We did. Though your uncle's intervention certainly helped." Thomas, who had walked out with them, shook his head. "The bank was going to approve it anyway." Violet's presentation was too compelling to ignore. I just sped things along. Either way, I'm in your debt, Xavier said, shaking Thomas's hand firmly. Both of you. Nonsense, Thomas replied. Now, how about we celebrate with lunch at the hotel? They've got a decent dining room these days. Over roast beef and potatoes, they discuss the future of the Galloway ranch. Xavier outlined his plans for the northern parcel, digging new wells, expanding the grazing land, building additional corrals for his growing horse breeding operation. You should consider bringing in a partner, Thomas suggested. Someone with a head for business to complement your ranching skills. Xavier's eyes met Violet's across the table. That's not a bad idea at all. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Violet felt a rush of possibilities opening before her, a life far different from what she'd imagined when she set out from St. Louis, but one that suddenly seemed full of promise. As they prepared to return to the ranch that afternoon, Thomas took his niece aside. You seem happy out there, Violet. Happier than I've seen you in a long time. Violet couldn't deny it. It's beautiful country, Uncle. And there's something about the work, it feels meaningful. And Galloway, Thomas asked, his tone careful. He seems to value your opinions. He does, Violet agreed, warmth coloring her cheeks. He's not what I expected. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Life rarely gives us what we expect. Sometimes it gives us something better. He squeezed her hand. Your room above the store will be ready whenever you want it, but don't feel rushed on my account. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both Violet and Xavier lost in their own thoughts. The landscape stretched around them, painted in the gold and amber hues of late afternoon colors Violet itched to capture on canvas. I meant what I said. Xavier broke the silence as they crested the final ridge before his property came into view. About a partner with business sense. Violet looked at him, studying his profile against the setting sun. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Galloway? I'm offering you a future, he replied, turning to meet her gaze. If you want it. The directness of his statement took her breath away. That's a significant offer. We hardly know each other. Xavier nodded, acknowledging this truth. I know enough. I know you're intelligent, resourceful, and unafraid of hard work. I know you see beauty in this harsh land when most only see obstacles. He paused. But you're right, there's more to know. I'm just asking for the chance to discover it together. It wasn't a declaration of love, not exactly. It was something more pragmatic, yet no less meaningful. An invitation to build something lasting, side by side. I need time to think, Violet said finally. This isn't a decision to make lightly. Of course, Xavier agreed. Take all the time you need. When they reached the ranch, Mrs. Abernathy greeted them with news that Violet's replacement wagon would arrive from Carson City in 3 days sooner than expected. The timeline suddenly seemed too short, pressing Violet toward a decision she wasn't ready to make. That evening, while Xavier was in the barn checking on a pregnant mare, Mrs. Abernathy found Violet on the porch, watching the sunset. He's a good man, the housekeeper said without preamble, settling into the rocking chair beside Violet's. One of the best I've known. I believe that, Violet replied softly. But marriage, if that's what he's suggesting, requires more than respect. Mrs. Abernathy's knitting needles clicked steadily. Does it? My Albert and I started with less. The love grew over time like a garden you tend together. She paused. But that's not to say there isn't already something there between you two. I've seen the way he looks at you when you're painting. And the way you watch for him to come home each evening. Violet couldn't deny the truth of this. There was an attraction, certainly, and more than that, a sense of rightness when they were together, a complementary rhythm to their thoughts and actions. I had plans, Violet said, more to herself than to Mrs. Abernathy. I was going to help Uncle Thomas in his store save enough to maybe open a small art studio someday. Plans change, the older woman said simply. Sometimes for the better. The next morning, Violet rose early, slipping out of the house before breakfast. She needed space to think, to sort through the tumult of emotions and possibilities swirling within her. She walked toward a small rise overlooking the ranch, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. The early light cast long shadows across the land, highlighting the gentle curves of hills, the stark angles of fences, the soft movement of cattle in the distance. Setting up on a flat rock, Violet began to draw. Not the landscape this time, but the ranch buildings, the sturdy main house, the weathered barn, the corral where Xavier's prized horses grazed. Then, almost without conscious thought, she sketched additions. A larger stable, an expanded house with a wide wraparound porch, a small studio with north-facing windows perfect for an artist's workspace. She was so absorbed in her drawing that she didn't hear the approach of footsteps until a shadow fell across her paper. "That looks like my ranch," Xavier said, "but better." Violet looked up, startled. "I didn't mean to, may I?" he asked, gesturing to the sketchbook. Violet handed it to him, watching his face as he studied her drawings. "This is how you see it," he said finally, his voice hushed with something like reverence. "Not just as it is, but as it could be." "I was just imagining," Violet said, suddenly self-conscious. Xavier sat beside her on the rock, still holding the sketchbook. "I've been doing the same, imagining what this place might become with the right partner." He looked at her directly. "With you." The morning sunlight caught in his blue eyes, turning them the color of summer sky. Violet felt herself drawn into their depths, into the future they promised. "I'm not a rancher's wife," she said, one last token of resistance. "No," Xavier agreed. "You're an artist, a businesswoman, a survivor. I'm not asking you to be a rancher's wife. I'm asking you to be my wife and help me build something neither of us could create alone." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know this is fast. I know we have much to learn about each other. But sometimes life gives you a moment of clarity, like when I saw you trapped under that wagon and knew I had to save you, no matter what." "You lifted an impossible weight," Violet murmured. "I'll do it again and again for you," Xavier promised. "Not just physically, but in every way that matters. Your burdens will be mine, your dreams my purpose." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. This wasn't the flowery courtship she'd once imagined for herself, but something more profound, a partnership founded on mutual admiration and shared vision. "Yes," Violet said simply. "Yes, I'll stay. I'll help you build this ranch, this life." Xavier's face transformed with joy. Gently, he cupped her cheek with one hand and leaned forward. Their first kiss was tender, a promise sealed in the golden light of morning, with the vast Nevada landscape as their witness. When they returned to the house, hand in hand, Mrs. Abernathy took one look at them and burst into tears of happiness. "I knew it," she exclaimed, embracing them both. "I just knew it from the moment he carried you through that door." The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of plans and preparations. A message was sent to Uncle Thomas, who arrived the following morning with a bottle of his best whiskey and heartfelt congratulations. "I suspected this might happen," he told Violet privately, "and I couldn't be happier. Xavier Galloway is a man of substance, not just in his holdings, but in his character." "It's all happening so quickly," Violet admitted. "Is it foolish to commit so soon?" Thomas smiled, patting her hand. "Some matches are made over years of acquaintance. Others arrive like lightning, sudden, powerful, illuminating everything in an instant." He looked at Xavier, who was deep in conversation with Mrs. Abernathy about wedding arrangements. "Besides, Any man who can lift a fully loaded wagon off my niece is worth keeping around. They decided on a simple ceremony in 2 weeks' time, enough time for proper preparations, but not so long that they would drive themselves mad with waiting. The wedding would take place at the ranch, with the judge from Rhyolite officiating and the small community of neighboring ranchers and townspeople in attendance. In the meantime, there was work to be done. The loan from the bank was finalized, and Xavier began arrangements to purchase the northern parcel. Violet, much to her uncle's understanding, declined to work at his store, focusing instead on integrating herself into ranch operations. She discovered she had a natural affinity for Xavier's horse breeding program. Her artistic eye recognized quality conformation in the animals, and her head for figures helped streamline the record-keeping and sales aspects of the business. Xavier, in turn, cleared out a small room at the back of the house, installing windows to catch the northern light, creating the art studio Violet had dreamed of. "Your talent shouldn't be lost amid ranch business," he insisted when she protested the expense. The day before her replacement, Wagon was due to arrive, now unnecessary except to transport her remaining possessions from town. Xavier took Violet to the site where her accident had occurred. "Why are we here?" she asked as they dismounted near the broken remains of her original wagon, still lying where it had fallen. Xavier surveyed the scene thoughtfully. "This is where our story began. I wanted to see it once more before we start our new chapter." Violet approached the wagon, running her hand along the splintered wood. "It seems impossible that you lifted this." "It wasn't impossible," Xavier said, coming to stand beside her. "Just necessary." He took her hand, his expression serious. "I want you to know something, Violet. I would have helped anyone trapped like that. It's the decent thing to do. But meeting you, knowing you, loving you, that's the miracle." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I rode to Carson City yesterday." Opening it, he revealed a simple gold band set with a small diamond. "I know we're already engaged, but I wanted to do this properly." Kneeling in the same dust where he had first seen her, Xavier looked up at Violet with eyes full of promise. "Violet Parker, will you marry me? Not because fate threw us together, but because we choose each other, freely and completely." Tears blurred Violet's vision as she nodded. "Yes, Xavier Galloway, I choose you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to embrace her. Their kiss was different this time, deeper, filled with certainty and growing desire. As they rode back to the ranch, the setting sun painted the landscape in hues of rose and gold. Violet looked out over the rolling terrain that would be her home, feeling a sense of rightness settle in her heart. "I never imagined," she said, "when I left St. Louis that I would find this." "What's that?" Xavier asked. "A place where I truly belong." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October air crisp with the promise of autumn. The ranch had been transformed, lanterns hung from trees, tables set up on the lawn, the porch decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. Inside, Mrs. Abernathy helped Violet dress in the gown they had ordered from Carson City, a creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was simpler than what she might have worn in St. Louis, but far more suited to the woman she had become. "You look beautiful, child," Mrs. Abernathy said, arranging Violet's dark hair beneath a crown of desert flowers. "Like you were born for this day, this place." Uncle Thomas, who would give her away, knocked at the door. "Ready, my dear?" he asked, his eyes misting as he took in her appearance. Downstairs, the house had filled with guests, ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers from Rhyolite, even the banker Franklin Ward and his family. Outside, beneath an arch twined with ribbons and sage, Xavier waited with the judge. As Violet stepped onto the porch on her uncle's arm, a hush fell over the gathering. Xavier turned, and the look on his face wonder, joy. Love would stay with Violet forever. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged simple vows, promising to support each other's dreams, to share burdens and joys, to build a life worthy of the love they had found so unexpectedly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge declared, and Xavier's kiss sealed their union as their friends and neighbors erupted in cheers. The celebration continued into the evening, with music from a local fiddler, abundant food prepared by Mrs. Abernathy and the neighboring ranch wives, and whiskey flowing freely as toasts were made to the new couple's happiness. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Xavier led Violet in their first dance as husband and wife, moving with surprising grace for a man more at home in a saddle than a ballroom. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Violet asked, breathless from both the exertion and the intensity of his gaze. "Mrs. Abernathy," Xavier admitted with a grin. "She's been giving me lessons every evening while you were painting. Said no wife of hers, her words, not mine, would suffer through a clumsy first dance." Violet laughed, leaning her head against his chest. "I have so much to learn about you still." "We have a lifetime for that," Xavier murmured, drawing her closer. Later, as the last guests departed and Mrs. Abernathy retired to her cottage at the edge of the property, with a wink that made Violet blush, Xavier led his bride up to their bedroom, now theirs, not just his. He had transformed it in small ways: new curtains, a larger bed, a vase of fresh flowers on the dressing table. But it was still unmistakably part of the ranch house, with its sturdy wooden furniture and simple comforts. As they stood in the moonlight streaming through the window, Xavier took Violet's hands in his. "Mrs. Galloway," he said softly, testing the name. "I like the sound of that," Violet replied, stepping closer to him. Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation, gentle at first, then passionate, a physical expression of the bond that had formed between them so rapidly yet so completely. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Violet traced the contours of Xavier's face with her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For lifting that wagon, for seeing something in me worth believing in, for everything that's brought us here." Xavier caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "That's just the beginning of what I'll do for you, Violet Galloway, just the beginning." The years that followed proved the truth of his words. Together, they transformed the Galloway Ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Xavier's cattle herd grew, but it was the horse breeding program guided by Violet's keen eye and business acumen that brought them real prosperity. The northern parcel, with its precious water rights, allowed them to expand as Xavier had dreamed. They built new corrals, a larger stable, additional grazing lands. The house grew too first with the addition of a proper art studio for Violet, whose landscapes began to sell to wealthy collectors in San Francisco, then with nurseries as their family expanded. Their first child, a son they named Thomas Xavier, arrived a year after their wedding, a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's thoughtful expression. 2 years later came Elizabeth, with a wild spirit and a talent for charming even the most cantankerous ranch hands. Finally, 3 years after that, the family welcomed James, the quietest of the three but with a natural gift for horsemanship that delighted his father. Through it all, the sleepless nights with newborns, the challenges of drought years, the everyday complications of running a growing ranch, the foundation of their partnership never wavered. They faced each challenge together, drawing strength from the bond that had formed in those early days when Violet was healing, and Xavier was dreaming of expansion. Mrs. Abernathy remained with them, becoming Grandma Abby to the children, though she insisted on maintaining her cottage for privacy. "You young people need your own home," she declared, though she was at the main house from dawn until dusk most days, cooking, cleaning, and dispensing wisdom. Uncle Thomas was a frequent visitor, delighting in his great-nieces and nephews. His store in Rhyolite prospered as the town grew, and he eventually took on a partner, allowing him more time to spend at the ranch. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Violet with a trip to San Francisco, where her artwork was being featured in a gallery exhibition. As they stood amid the city's cultural elite, watching as her paintings of Nevada landscapes drew admiration and impressive sales, Xavier squeezed her hand. "Proud of you, Mrs. Galloway," he murmured. Violet leaned against him, content. "We've built something remarkable, haven't we? Not just the ranch, but our life together." Later that night, in the luxury of their hotel suite, Xavier presented her with a leather-bound album. Inside were photographs and sketches documenting their decade together, the ranch's growth, the children's milestones, quiet moments of everyday happiness. The final page held a sketch Violet recognized her own style of their first meeting. She had drawn it from memory years before. Xavier bending to lift the overturned wagon, his face set with determination, her own expression a mixture of fear and hope. "10 years ago," Xavier said, "I happened upon a wagon accident and found my future. Every day since then has been a gift." Violet traced the lines of the drawing. "You know, I've never been able to explain how you lifted that wagon. It should have been impossible." Xavier smiled, the same smile that still made her heart quicken after all these years. "Some things defy explanation. Like how a chance meeting can change the course of 2 lives so completely." He took the album and set it aside, then pulled Violet into his arms. "I lifted that wagon because I had to, because something in me knew, even then, that you were worth any effort, any pain." "And was I?" Violet asked, her eyes shining with emotion. "Worth it?" "Every day," Xavier assured her, lowering his lips to hers. "Every single day." As they celebrated their love renewed and deepened by the years they had shared, Violet knew with absolute certainty that their story, begun so dramatically with an act of remarkable strength, had grown into something even stronger. A partnership that could weather any storm, lift any burden, and find beauty in the harshest landscapes of life. In the heart of the Nevada desert, they had created an oasis not just of prosperity, but of love, family, and shared purpose. It was everything Violet had never known she wanted, and everything Xavier had always hoped to build. Together, they had made it real. And it had all begun with an overturned wagon, a trapped young woman, and a cowboy who found the strength to change both their destinies with his bare hands.